Hi, it's me, Sir JP, and welcome to another episode of Philosophy Live, my own way of reaching senior high school students during this time of pandemic. This is already our 6th episode, and we will briefly discuss about the modern era of philosophy. This period is often further subdivided into 3 major historical periods: the Age of Reason, the 17th century, the Age of Enlightenment, 18th century, and the modern period, the 19th century. The Age of Reason and the Age of Enlightenment together are often referred to as the early modern period. The Age of Reason period of the modern era of philosophy is generally regarded as the start of modern philosophy and roughly equates to the 17th century. The Age of Reason saw a continuation of the move away from theology and faith-based arguments and marks the shaking off of medieval approaches to philosophy such as scholasticism, in preference for a more unified philosophical systems like rationalism and empiricism. The advances in science, the growth of religious tolerance, and the rise of philosophical liberalism also led to the revival in political philosophy in general. In order to understand further, we shall briefly talk about scholasticism, rationalism, and empiricism. We begin with scholasticism. Kindly refer to the slide on my side. Scholasticism. As a philosophy, it can help theology to explain the mysteries and revelations of faith so that they are understandable to reason. The purpose of scholasticism was to bring reason to the support of our faith, to strengthen the religious life and the church by the development of intellectual power. Rationalism. And like what I said in the previous episodes, humans are rational animals or rational creatures. It is therefore understood that humans must know how to reason out. But humans as we are an advanced species. We have to reason out properly. And that is rationalism. It is a belief or theory that opinions and actions should be based on reason and knowledge rather than on religious belief or emotional response. Rationalism is the practice of only believing what is based on reason or with explanations. An example of rationalism is not believing in the supernatural or what cannot be explained by science. Reliance on reason as the best guide for belief and action is what rationalism wants from all of us. The third one is empiricism. Empiricism, it is a theory that states that knowledge comes only or primarily from sensory experience. Empiricism emphasizes the role of empirical evidence in the formation of ideas rather than innate ideas or just mere traditions. Moderate empiricists believe that significant knowledge comes from our experience, but also know that there are truths that are not based on direct experience. For example, a mathematical problem such as 2 plus 2 equals 4 is a fact that does not have to be investigated or experienced in order to be true. We now proceed with knowing some of our modern philosophers. In fact, today, we shall be dealing mostly with mathematicians. We begin with the famous René Descartes. René Descartes was a French philosopher, mathematician, scientist, and writer of the Age of Reason. He has been called the father of modern philosophy. and much of his subsequent Western philosophy can be seen as a response to his writings. He is responsible for one of the best-known quotations in philosophy, cogito ergo sum, which means, I think, therefore I am. It was during the year 1619 that Descartes was stationed at Ulm and had 3 dreams that inspired him to seek a new method for scientific inquiry and to envision a unified science. Soon afterwards, in 1620, he began looking for this new method, starting but never completing several works on method, including drafts on the first 11 rules of the rules for the direction of the mind. Aristotle and subsequent medieval dialecticians set out a fairly large, though limited, set of acceptable argument forms known as syllogisms. What are syllogisms? Syllogisms. It is composed of a general or major premise, a particular or minor premise, and of course, a conclusion. Descartes' contribution in philosophy was and will never be forgotten. His contribution to mathematics was also of the first order, as he is the inventor of the Cartesian coordinate system and the founder of analytic geometry. According to him, it is not enough to have a good mind. The main thing is to use it well. Here is a quick video about René Descartes.
What am I? A thinking thing. That's what René Descartes believed. But how did he get there? Descartes asked, what, if anything, can I know for certain? He decided he couldn't rely on any evidence acquired from his senses, since they sometimes misled him. A straight stick can look bent in water. In the past he had mistaken the shape of objects in the distance, and so on. Worse still, whilst sleeping, he sometimes dreamt he'd woken up. So how then could he be sure he wasn't dreaming now? But hang on, surely 2 plus 3 equals 5, even in a dream. Descartes, a mathematician, wouldn't get that wrong, would he? Even here, Descartes realized he couldn't claim absolute certainty, for what if an evil demon was in control of his thoughts, manipulating them so that every time he added numbers together, he made a basic error? Where would that leave him? There would be nothing he could be sure of, just a whirlpool of doubt. Descartes' lifebelt was the realization that even if such a demon existed, it couldn't deceive him about his own existence. Every thought, no matter how unreliable, proved he existed as a thinking thing. He could be more sure of that even than that he had a body. This is his famous cogito argument. I think, therefore I am. Cogito ergo sum.
The next philosopher who made one of the greatest contributions is Blaise Pascal, also known as the father of modern philosophy. Pascal arguably was the one who came closest to articulating a coherent, comprehensive, durable philosophy of science, consistent with and comparable to the standard view that prevails today. Pascal was torn between his love of geometric proof and pure logical demonstration on one hand, and his skeptical, pragmatic instincts in favor of down-to-earth experimentalism and empiricism on the other hand. As a result, he seemed trapped in a kind of philosophical limbo. He acknowledged that all hypotheses must be tested and confirmed by rigorous experiments. Once a hypothesis is tested, the problem of determining the true cause of the phenomenon remains, and becomes itself a matter for further investigation. Did you know that the first successful calculator was invented by Blaise Pascal? It is known as the Pascaline. He was only the second person known to have created a device of this kind. So why was it named after him? A company by the name of Descartes had manufactured a type of mechanical calculator in 1624. Until 1645, Pascal worked on improvements to the machine and was very successful at it. And as a tribute, it was named after him, the Pascaline. Pascal was also a critic of government and the justice system. He said, "Justice without force is powerless. Force without justice is tyrannical. Hence, every civilized society seeks to establish a just society. There are various means to achieve this end, power being one of them. Justice without power is opposed, because there are always wicked and corrupt men. Power without justice is questioned by many. Justice and power must therefore be brought together, so that whatever is just may be powerful, and whatever is powerful may be just." Here is a quick video about Blaise Pascal.
Blaise Pascal was a 17th century mathematician and philosopher who made great contributions to both fields. You might have heard of Pascal's triangle? He was born on June 19, 1623. His mother died when he was about 3 years old, so his father moved Blaise and his two sisters to Paris and took charge of educating them. Blaise took to math like a fish to water. While other kids were like, "I like girls," Pascal was like, "I like conic sections." But his dad worried Blaise would reject the classics, so he banned math from their studies. Blaise took to studying geometry behind his dad's back and made up a lot of his own geometry terms. As a teenager, he started working on calculating machines, known as Pascal's calculators. Over 13 years, he built 20 machines and 50 prototypes, including one of the first mechanical calculators. But it wasn't a huge commercial success. It was cumbersome and it was really expensive. It became more of a status symbol for the rich than an actual machine. Pascal is also credited with coming up with Pascal's triangle. It's basically an addition pyramid. Each number equals the sum of the two numbers above it. This creates patterns along the diagonals and the rows and can be used to solve things like probability, combinations, and exponents. Outside of math, he dabbled in the sciences, invented the hydraulic press and the syringe. Pascal may have been a man of science, but his most famous work was entirely unscientific. He had one of the most unique perspectives on religion and faith, particularly the belief in God. Pascal was by no means the first scientist to question or attempt to prove or disprove the existence of God, but his take was unique in its pragmatism. The way he saw it, like a mathematician, the odds of success were what mattered. If you do believe in God and he exists, you win. If he doesn't, well, nothing lost, nothing gained. So Pascal argued, bet on God. You have nothing to lose. This hedging your bets approach to religion became known as Pascal's wager, and it opened up an entirely new way of thinking about religion. Pascal viewed the world in terms of maximizing benefits and returns. So even if you're not a religious person or you take issue with Pascal's wager, you can't deny that Pascal ushered in a new school of religious and philosophical thought. Pascal continued to write on religion and philosophy until 1662, when he died from a stomach tumor at just 39.
The next philosopher for today is Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz. He was a German philosopher, mathematician, scientist, and a polymath of the Age of Reason. Late in 1675, Leibniz laid the foundations of both integral and differential calculus. With this discovery, he ceased to consider time and space as mere substances. Another step closer to monadology. Monadology is a very concise and condensed presentation of his theory that the universe consists of an infinite number of substances called monads. Leibniz discusses the nature of monadic perception and consciousness, the principles which govern truth and reason, and the revelation of the monadic universe to God. Leibniz defines a monad as a simple substance which cannot be divided into parts. A compound substance may be formed by an aggregation of monads. Thus, a compound substance may be divided into simple parts. According to Leibniz, monads differ in quality, and no two monads are exactly alike. Each monad has its own individual identity. Each monad has its own internal principle of being. A monad may undergo change, but this change is internally determined. Changes in the properties of any monad are not externally determined by other monads. His contribution also to logic were perhaps the most important between Aristotle and the developments in modern formal logic of the mid-19th century, and to some extent, he anticipated modern symbolic logic. He is equally important in the history of mathematics, as he is the inventor of calculus and the discoverer of the binary system. Here is a glimpse of the philosophy of Leibniz, inasmuch as contingent argument is concerned.
We live in an amazing universe. Have you ever wondered why it exists? Why does anything at all exist? Gottfried Leibniz wrote, "The first question which should rightly be asked is, why is there something rather than nothing?" He came to the conclusion that the explanation is found in God. But is this reasonable? Everything that exists has an explanation of its existence. If the universe has an explanation of its existence, that explanation is God. The universe exists. From these, it follows logically that the explanation of the universe's existence is God. The logic of this argument is airtight. If the three premises are true, the conclusion is unavoidable. But are they more plausibly true than false? The third premise is undeniable for anyone seeking truth. But what about the first premise? Why not say, the universe is just there, and that's all? No explanation needed. End of discussion. Well, imagine you and a friend are hiking in the woods and come across a shiny sphere lying on the ground. You would, naturally, wonder how it came to be there. And you'd think it odd if your friend said, "There's no reason or explanation for it. Stop wondering. It just is." And if the ball were larger, it would still require an explanation. In fact, if the ball were the size of the universe, the change in its size wouldn't remove the need for an explanation. Indeed, curiosity about the existence of the universe seems scientific and intuitive. Someone might say, if everything that exists needs an explanation, what about God? Doesn't he need an explanation? And if God doesn't need an explanation, then why does the universe need an explanation? To address this, Leibniz makes a key distinction between things that exist necessarily and things that exist contingently. Things that exist necessarily exist by necessity of their own nature. It's impossible for them not to exist. Many mathematicians think that abstract objects like numbers and sets exist like this. They're not caused to exist by something else, they just exist by necessity of their own nature. Things that exist contingently are caused to exist by something else. Most of the things we're familiar with exist contingently. They don't have to exist. They only exist because something else caused them to exist. If your parents had never met, you wouldn't exist. There's no reason to think the world around us had to exist. If the universe had developed differently, there might have been no stars or planets. It's logically possible that the whole universe might not have existed. It doesn't exist necessarily, it exists contingently. If the universe might not have existed, why does it exist? The only adequate explanation for the existence of a contingent universe is that its existence rests on a non-contingent being, something that cannot not exist because of the necessity of its own nature. It would exist no matter what. So, everything that exists has an explanation of its existence, either in the necessity of its own nature or in an external cause. But what about our second premise? Is it reasonable to call the explanation of the universe God? Well, what is the universe? It's all of space-time reality, including all matter and energy. It follows that if the universe has a cause of its existence, that cause cannot be part of the universe. It must be non-physical and immaterial, beyond space and time. The list of entities that could possibly fit this description is fairly short, and abstract objects cannot cause anything. Leibniz's contingency argument shows that the explanation for the existence of the universe can be found only in the existence of God. Or, if you prefer not to use the term God, you may simply call him the extremely powerful, uncaused, necessarily existing, non-contingent, non-physical, immaterial, eternal being who created the entire universe and everything in it.
The next philosopher we will discuss is David Hume. David Hume was a Scottish philosopher, economist, and historian of the Age of Enlightenment. He was an important figure in the Scottish Enlightenment, and along with John Locke and Bishop George Berkeley, one of the three main figureheads of the influential British empiricism movement. He wrote a treatise of human nature, which aims to be a full-fledged philosophical system. The book says that human emotions affect reason and characterizes moral goodness in terms of feelings. Hume conceived of philosophy as the inductive science of human nature, and he concluded that humans are creatures more of sensitive and practical sentiment than a reason. Even today, Hume's philosophical work remains refreshingly modern, challenging, and provocative. However, in later life, he largely turned away from philosophy in favor of economics and his other great love, history. And it was only then that he achieved recognition in his own lifetime. To know more about his philosophy, here is a video about David Hume.
Welcome to the McCat Multimedia Series, a McCat analysis of David Hume's An Inquiry Concerning Human Understanding. Can we really rely on our senses? The Scottish philosopher David Hume focused on this problem in his book An Inquiry into Human Understanding, first published in 1748. Hume was well known for his skepticism and his empiricism, the view that all knowledge is derived from what we perceive via our five senses, rather than through reasoning and theoretical speculation. For Hume, our minds can only operate in four ways: compounding, transposing, augmenting, or diminishing materials received from the senses. He believed that the only true statements we can make about reality are empirical, because they are directly based on perceptions. And he argued that we should be skeptical of general theories, since they are produced by customs of mind, meaning habits of thoughts, rather than direct observations. We have no guarantee, after all, that the world will continue to behave in the way it has done in the past. We can get a better grasp of Hume's perspective on human understanding by looking at a child playing with modeling clay. Hume wrote that every thought we have consists of compounds of ideas, each directly derived from sense perceptions. It's like a child sticking pieces of clay together. One is shaped like a piece of cheese, two others like slices of bread. Together, they form something that our senses tell us looks like a sandwich. Hume would add that any compound ideas we have about it, that's a big sandwich, that clay sandwich doesn't look good to eat, are also derived from sense perceptions. The human mind, Hume believed, can transpose one complex idea onto another, generating a new idea, just as one piece of clay can be exchanged for another. For example, removing a narwhal's tusk and putting it onto a horse, making the idea of a unicorn. According to Hume, the idea of God as a wise and powerful being is in fact nothing other than the augmentation of certain qualities of our own minds joined together into one new idea. Our minds, he thought, have nothing else from which to form an idea of God, just as our child has nothing but clay to model with. So although the human mind can mold all sorts of fantastical ideas, Hume states that ultimately we are heavily restricted in what facts we can think, because these ideas must be based on direct sense impressions. Most importantly, though, Hume taught us that complex ideas should be viewed with skepticism, because while we can explain their formation, we cannot prove their reality. A more detailed examination of his ideas can be found in the McCat analysis.
The corruption of the best things give rise to the worst, said David Hume. Corruption is the enemy of development and of good governance. It must be get rid of. Both the government and the people at large must come together to achieve this national objective. Corruption is a cancer that steals from the poor, eats away at governance and moral fiber, and destroys trust. In the succeeding slides, I will give you a glimpse of the modern schools of thought which you need to ponder upon. We begin with existentialism, from the word existence. Existentialism is a form of philosophical inquiry that explores the nature of existence by emphasizing experience of the human subject.
The A to Z of isms, existentialism. There they are, the quintessential existentialists, lounging in a Parisian left-bank cafe, discussing the meaninglessness of life. There is some truth behind every detail of this stereotype, but in its totality, it's a misleading caricature. It owes much to Jean-Paul Sartre and Albert Camus, both philosophers, writers and famous public intellectuals in France from the Second World War until Sartre's death in 1980. Sartre argued that the fundamental principle of existentialism is that existence precedes essence. In other words, we have to create our own lives, our own selves, our own values. God does not exist. We are born without a destiny. It's all up to us. We are therefore condemned to be free. Condemned because our freedom is far from that of the carefree hedonistic consumer on a shopping spree. We have an absolute responsibility for ourselves, which can lead to despair and anguish, even questioning the point of living, the classic existential crisis. This existential angst has not gone away. It's the human condition, as real today as ever. Political freedom and material prosperity end the struggle for basic existence and survival, but only increase the struggle to find genuine meaning for our existence. Why are we here? How can we make a difference? How should we really live? Sartre took our freedom as given, but his partner and fellow philosopher Simone de Beauvoir pointed out that it's not always that simple. In her seminal book The Second Sex, she argued that society and political structures often conspire to hold women back. Camus argued that yes, we are free, but the world itself is absurd. He retold the classical myth of Sisyphus, condemned forever to push a rock up a hill, only to see it roll back down, for him to start all over again. Like Sisyphus, our task is to accept our own absurd lives cheerfully. Wonderful though life can be, it has no ultimate purpose, and we all end as dust. However, not all existentialists believe we live in a godless, senseless universe. The father of existentialism, the 19th century Dane Søren Kierkegaard, believed in the Christian God, but argued reason and evidence can never prove that he exists. We have to take a non-rational leap of faith. At its heart then, existentialism is not really all about meaninglessness. It's about the responsibility we all have to make the right choices in life, both for ourselves and for others. A heavy responsibility indeed, and just as important now as in post-war Paris.
We now proceed with Marxism. It is a political and economic way of organizing society where the workers own the means of production. It was developed by Karl Marx and Engels.
What exactly is Marxism and how it's a source of ideas whose specter may be still haunting Europe? Coming up. Marxism is a social, political, and economic ideology developed in the 19th century by German thinkers Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels and explained in the Communist Manifesto and Capital. According to Marxism, being based on materialism and dialectics, materialism assumes that everything, including people, can be represented as matter and physical processes. Therefore, all political and cultural issues can be reduced to economic aspects, relations people have in the production process, the struggle for resources, and means of production. The Marxist dialectics, on the other hand, is based on the presupposition that reality is subject to ongoing change resulting from a conflict of opposing forces, with the single possible outcome of full domination of one over the other. The conclusion here is that the sole stimulus for social change is the class struggle determined by its irresolvable conflict of interest among them. The class conflict had been found predominantly between workers, the proletariat, and owners of means of production, the bourgeoisie. If a factory owner gained profit by keeping part of the value created by employees working on machines he owned, then according to Marx, he is guilty of exploitation. Marxism assumes that the history of societies is bound to undergo consecutive transitions. Capitalism, seen as a system of oppression, must be followed by a proletariat revolution, which, having forcefully gained control over means of production, will ultimately lead to communist utopia. Marx consented a non-violent path for changes in some places. However, as he pointed out, most countries will require force as the revolution's lever, and the way to boost society transformation is through revolutionary terror. As history shows, this point of view had become the setting stone of the most widespread flavor, the Leninist Marxism, the ideology of Soviet Union and other communist states. Karl Marx had accurately foreseen capitalism leading to growing social inequality and the dominance of corporations on the global market. On the other hand, his proposition that capitalism would make the average workers poorer and extinction of the middle class, leading to communist revolutions in prosperous capitalist countries, turned out false. The average worker in those countries was getting rich, the middle class prospered, and all the while, communist revolutions kept breaking out in poor, rural countries like Russia. We appreciate you guys spending time with us.
Utilitarianism. It is a theory of morality which advocates actions that foster happiness or pleasure and opposes actions that cause unhappiness or harm. Another video for that, please.
Utilitarianism. Utilitarianism is an ethical theory that determines right from wrong by focusing on outcomes. It is a form of consequentialism. Utilitarianism holds that the most ethical choice is the one that will produce the greatest good for the greatest number. It is the only moral framework that can be used to justify military force or war. It is also the most common approach to moral reasoning used in business because of the way in which it accounts for costs and benefits. However, Because we cannot predict the future, it's difficult to know with certainty whether the consequences of our actions will be good or bad. This is one of the limitations of utilitarianism. Utilitarianism also has trouble accounting for values such as justice and individual rights. For example, assume a hospital has 4 people whose lives depend upon receiving organ transplants: a heart, lungs, a kidney, and a liver. If a healthy person wanders into the hospital, his organs could be harvested to save 4 lives at the expense of 1 life. This would arguably produce the greatest good for the greatest number. But few would consider it an acceptable course of action, let alone the most ethical one. So, although utilitarianism is arguably the most reason-based approach to determining right and wrong, it has obvious limitations.
Phenomenology. Phenomenology is the study of structures of consciousness as experienced from the first person's view. The central structure of an experience is its intentions, its being directed towards doing something, as it is an experience of or about some object. It must be done in good faith.
Welcome to an explainer on phenomenology. At its most basic, phenomenology is the study of lived experience. As its name suggests, phenomenology is concerned with the study of phenomena that arise from the experience of being in the world. The development of modern phenomenology, established by Edmund Husserl in the early 20th century, was a break from the Cartesian system that pitched stark distinctions between the outer, real reality and the individual experience of reality. Following the Cartesian principle, outer reality is a separate and distinct entity that can only be understood in rational terms through cognitive processes of deduction. Sense perception was thought to distort this process, and certainly emotions were considered a lower form of experience emanating from the recesses of the body. In contrast, phenomenology seeks to understand the outside world as it is interpreted by and through human consciousness. Ontologically speaking, that means speaking in terms of how philosophers understand the nature of being and existence, Husserl purported that reality could be grasped by and through structures of consciousness, by applying what he called intentionality to the object of study, or intentionally directing one's focus to describe realities. For Husserl, to achieve deeper understanding of an object of study, a researcher could quarantine their personal judgments, a process called bracketing, so that preconceived notions do not interfere with the phenomenological inquiry. It is at this point that Martin Heidegger's approach breaks with Husserl's process. In fact, Heidegger was very critical of Husserl's phenomenology, where Husserl sought to capture objects of study as graspable entities that could be objectively studied. Heidegger employed the notion of Dasein, the situated meaning of a human in the world. For Heidegger, consciousness is a product or construction of the historical context from which it arises, and in turn, one can never approach an object of study in a presuppositionless form. That is, objects of study cannot be neatly separated from their contexts, nor should they be. Reality and consciousness are co-creations, and because of this, human understanding always arises from the relationship between the two acting upon each other. Thank you for watching.
And last but not the least, psychoanalysis. Developed by Sigmund Freud, it is defined as a set of psychological theories and therapeutic techniques. All people possess unconscious thoughts, feelings, desires, and memories. A video for you so you could understand more.
All of us can feel overwhelmed and burdened from time to time, as if all the hurts and trauma from our past, the stresses of everyday life, and our goals and dreams for the future have gotten all tangled up, paralyzing our mind. This tangle disturbs our relationships, interferes with our personal growth, makes us feel out of control, and creates painful emotions like sadness, anxiety, anger, and fear. This is when seeing a psychoanalyst can have lasting and life-changing benefits. Psychoanalysis is a deeper, more personalized form of talk therapy, and studies show that the benefits last long after treatment ends. In psychoanalysis, patients can talk freely and safely share their feelings, dreams, memories, desires, and life stresses. Patterns emerge, past traumas, perhaps long forgotten, and worries about the future come into awareness. As the therapy deepens, you and your analyst will unravel this clustered ball of yarn, string by string, helping you find relief from emotional distress, improve personal relationships with friends, family, and loved ones, come to terms with the traumatic past, feel understood as a unique individual, and take more pleasure in life. Psychoanalysis unlocks the past, informs the present, expands the future. For more information about psychoanalysis or to find help near you, visit www.apsa.org.
Thank you for joining us today for another episode of Philosophy Live for senior high school students. I hope I made the lessons easier for you to understand. Don't forget to like the video or react, follow the page or follow the account, subscribe the YouTube channel, and share to others. Until our next episode. Goodbye!